Hello Bitzbox, this is Craig from Bitzbox.co.uk here, and in this video I'm going to run down a list of things that can cause 3D prints to fail. This is Resin 3D prints, of course, and just ways that you can sort of fix your failures or prevent them even happening in the first place. There's a lot of things that can go wrong when it comes to 3D printing, and you only have to look on the Facebook groups to see loads of posts from people who post their failures, and they ask the community what went wrong, how can they fix that, and I wanted to make a video to maybe answer some of them questions. So anyone who comes across this video will know the answers if they were to face such similar failures, and I'll probably use the word failure quite a lot in this video. Now this isn't a complete list, there's so many variables when it comes to 3D printing in resin, but hopefully this will help. I mean, if it helps one person, I always say if these videos help one person, then they're worth making. But I've got a nice little list of things here that can cause your 3D prints to fail, which is a bit daunting, and that's probably not even a full list. But there are little things you can do to sort them out. So you'll know when you watch this, I may try and get some images of some failures for examples, but if I don't, then just use your imagination, I suppose. So, yeah, there's a lot of things here that can cause a print to fail. So the first thing I've got written down is the temperature of the room. Now, this is something that people first getting into the hobby might not actually realise, but the room temperature is very important. Ideally, you want to be around sort of 20 degrees C, which is quite warm. But to be honest, in my experience, anything above 15 is usually fine. But when you start getting colder, that's when you will start getting failures. Now, there are ways around this, not the best solution to this, but really the only solution that you can really do if heating the resin or the room is not an option, you can bump the exposure time up a little bit. That will help. But to be honest, you're going to lose a bit of detail doing that, so just be mindful of that. But that's one way you can get around it a little bit. But what a lot of people will do, if they've got printers in enclosed spaces, they'll have a little heater in there to heat the air around, and you can even heat up the resin itself. I've seen people use like these bands that can go around with that. I don't know how effective they are. I think they're for heating sort of home brewery stuff, and when you're brewing your own beers. I think that's what they're from. Never used them myself, so I can't say. Just going to turn, so I've got a light on now, but I really need to turn it down, I'm blinding myself. There we go. Hopefully you can still see me okay. Yeah, so the temperature of the room is very important. So I know one thing as well, if people have stuff stuck to their build plate and they can't get it off, I've seen a lot of people suggest putting the build plate in the freezer, and that helps. I'm sure it does, that's not something I really want to do, but if you do that and your build plate is quite cold, then just keep that in mind as well, because obviously when you put a cold build plate into the resin vat, that's going to cool the resin down around it, and that's going to cause all sorts of issues. I always prefer to go the other way and heat up the build plate to help get resin prints off it, but normally they come off quite easily. Another thing that can cause issues, and probably the most common thing, is the FEP sheet getting worn out. Now, I've recently changed one on a vat over here, and a lot of people say it's a little bit cloudy, but you want that sort of sound. Now, I don't want to keep bashing that because I don't want to wear it, but yeah, like a snare drum. That's where you know it's like quite nice and tight, and after a while they wear out. They wear out. And that's probably the most common cause of any failures. So you'll notice maybe you'll get failures in certain areas of your build plate, and that could well be an area where the FEP is worn. Usually it wears in the middle first, and I've seen quite a few people post stuff where it's not printing in the middle. That's definitely because of the FEP's getting worn. Now you can replace it, but if you're lazy like me, you can increase your lift height, and that will help as well. I always get messages, put the phone over there, I always get messages when I'm filming, and then like nothing for hours before. So yeah, increasing your lift height So I really need diagrams and stuff to explain it, but essentially there's your FEP sheet, and as the build plate goes up, that's going to expand the FEP sheet, and the looser it is, the higher that will be able to pull the FEP sheet up, and if it doesn't pull it up enough so it snaps back, then it's going to fail. So yeah, increasing the lift height can definitely help, and I always like to lower the lift speed as well at the same time. That's just a preference of mine. I do think some people just, I think a lot of the default profiles for lift speed is just a little bit too fast. That will wear your FEP out a bit quicker sometimes as well. So that's something to be mindful of. I normally just do the two at the same time. Probably only need to do one or the other, but yeah, definitely increasing your lift height if your FEP's getting worn, or just replace your FEP sheet. It's a job I absolutely hate doing, so I tend to do it as a little as possible, but it does make such a difference once you do have a nice fresh FEP sheet on there. I always suggest, if money can stretch that far, to have a spare vat. It's just a lifesaver, especially if you're printing a lot of stuff like we do when you sound stuff. If you get a failed print and the FEP sheet needs changing, you just chuck the other vat in there, and then you get round to replacing the FEP sheet at your leisure, which is exactly what I've done here. And of course, for troubleshooting, if the FEP, if you try a new FEP and you still get failure, then you know that's not the issue as well. So, and you'd rather do that than go through the hassle of having to replace it and then still getting that issue. Another common one as well, probably even more common than FEP wearing, maybe, is not having a level bed. It's probably common, but most people, when they get into this hobby, they know to level their printers. So, some printers now are coming out with auto bed leveling, which is just amazing. But yeah, and that can be a bit of a pain. There's debates whether the actual printer itself should be level. Now, I think if you're leveling your build plate, then whatever orientation your printer's at, I mean, they're only going to be out by a few mil, it's probably going to be fine. But as soon as you move your printer slightly after you've leveled, then I think there could be issues. I suggest trying to level your printer when you level your build plate anyway, and then you can always just check then with every print that's level. But yeah, if you end up only getting prints on like one side of your build plate, whether it be on the left or the right or front or the back, then that could certainly be because your printer's out of level slightly. But again, there's debates whether that matters, but in my experience it does. So there you go. I'm just giving my opinion. Where I have my printers is off level a little bit, and I do have to prop up one side, and I do find that makes a difference. So there you go. And I've also got under leveling as well. If you're on a bit of a wobbly surface as well, so if it is off level and the printer wobbles, then obviously once the build plate goes up and there's that suction between the build plate and the FEP sheet, that could make your printer wobble about a little bit. It's probably minimal, you probably wouldn't notice it, but it's enough for a failure. I mean, millimeters, anything that just stuff by millimeters is enough for a failure in this hobby. That is the unfortunate fact, really. Okay, so another thing as well, pre-supported files. I have a love-hate relationship with pre-supported files. The problem is, whoever makes files, and there's people who make fantastic miniatures, there's hundreds of people who make fantastic miniatures, fantastic bits, etc. A lot of them offer pre-supported versions, which is great, and 9 times out of 10 they will work. The problem is these people can't test every single scenario. They can't test every single printer, they can't test every single resin, they can't test them all in every single room temperature. So, your circumstances might just be slightly different, and yeah, pre-supported files might sometimes fail. I've noticed with some of the stuff we've stocked in the past, or some stuff I've printed for myself, certain files always failed, and as soon as I done my own supports, they were fine. So yeah, don't always rely on pre-supported stuff. If you use a pre-supported file and it fails, whether it be completely or in certain areas, then try supporting it yourself first, and then you'll know. And if that still fails, then maybe it's something else. Another thing to bear in mind though, if you are supporting stuff yourself, try and have as little of the miniature as possible parallel to the build plate. So I think bases are a good example of that. Do I have any bases lying around? I always do. I'll tell you what, I'll use the lid of this brush soap. So here's a round thing. So if that's level with the build plate and the vat, then it's going to cause a lot of suction when it lifts up off the vat. And that can cause issues. Suction can definitely cause an issue. So when you print stuff like this, I mean, you can have them up that way, or maybe at an angle. I always do roughly 30 degrees. That way you don't need as many supports either, and you get a lot less suction and a better print. But I don't even recommend printing bases at all in resin, to be honest. Some people do, but it's not for me. They always get a little bit warped sometimes. And yeah, just they never come out great for me. But yeah, so orientation is quite important if you are supporting your own stuff. Try and have as little suction as possible, and that will make a big difference. So I've also got written down sometimes with pre-supported stuff and your own support, sometimes the connection points can be very small. Now people will do this when they pre-support their own stuff, so there's obviously a lot less sort of scarring on the miniatures. Sometimes supports can leave little marks where they were, and it's fine if it works, but I find a lot of the time, at least for me, if there's very small contact points on miniatures, then the supports will just fail. They're just not strong enough. So yeah, I always like to have a bit thicker. It's easy enough to clean up afterwards in most cases. So that's something just to look out for as well. If you've got pre-supported stuff, just have a look around and see how small the contact points are, because if that's an area where it's failed, then that's probably the issue. So yeah, something to be mindful of. I use the smallest little supports, the light supports in Bitzbox, and they seem to be absolutely fine. Anything smaller I have issues with, but you can't, without doing a lot of adjustments in Bitzbox, you can't really make them much smaller, and just by default they seem absolutely fine. And now seems like a good time to segue into the sponsor of this video, who are Bitzbox. So we've teamed up with Bitzbox, who are offering some large discounts on their pro version of their software. So you can use the code Bitzbox20 to get 20% off a yearly subscription. But what's more, if you just want to try it out for a month, you can also use the code Bitzbox20 to try Bitzbox Pro for a month for just $5.99. That's $5.99. They're also offering some massive discounts to celebrate their birthday, and this is running until July the 3rd, and you can get 40% off a yearly subscription, and you can even use their pro version on 2 different devices. So we'll put a link down below to Bitzbox so you can check them out. Okay, so we're almost there, which is good. Again, there's lots more that could probably go wrong, but this is what I've got written down. So the next thing is the LCD screen itself. Unless you have a DLP printer, which I highly recommend actually, they are worth the money. They are fantastic. But yeah, the LCD screens, they almost always go wrong. I've used Elegoo machines quite a lot, and while their support is so good, I don't think I've had a single Elegoo machine where the LCD screen hasn't died at some point. A couple of them have been my own fault. So if you get resin on the screen, it's very hard to sort of scrape it off without damaging the screen itself. So I highly recommend getting a screen protector if you've got an older machine. The newer machines now have sort of tempered glass, so the Mars 3 Pro, the Saturn 2, and I assume all the Mars and Saturns after that do, and I'm not too sure on other companies because I don't really use them very much. A DLP printer, obviously you don't have to worry about it, which is fantastic. So yeah, I highly recommend protecting your screen, but they do just die by themselves as well. That does happen, and you'll know this has happened because you'll have nothing on your build plate. There'll be nothing in your vat, nothing on your build plate, it'll just be complete nothingness. And when you do an exposure test, you'll just have the UV light showing through and nothing else. And yeah, the screen was 99% of the time will be dead if that happens. But I do recommend checking the connection, because in one of my, I think it was my Sonic Mini, I had that issue and it just turned out to be a loose connection. And then I had half the screen die for some reason later on down the line. Now you can get resin in on the motherboard as well if you're not careful. Even if you've got tempered glass, it is recommended to have a screen protector as well, just to stop any resin from getting around the edges of that. But again, like, a screen protector just solves so many issues. You can just use ones from like tablets, and they work just fine. There are ones made specifically for certain printers, but you do end up paying a little bit of extra money for them, and it's not really needed. As long as you get one that's big enough to cover your screen, then that's absolutely fine. They're just handy, and just, again, if you get any resin on there, you can just take the screen protector off, put a new one on, and you don't have to worry about your screen getting damaged. So another issue, which I've had sometimes, you don't see it come up very often in Facebook groups and that. Especially, I get it more with the Elegoo stuff, their newer stuff anyway. And that's if the VAT isn't screwed in properly, then like it's got to be perfectly screwed in. Again, this is millimeters here. If it's not screwed in enough, and it just lifts up just a millimeter when it's printing, you'll get failures. It needs to be in solid so it doesn't move. And I find with the Elegoo machines, they have these sort of bolts that screw in. Over time, they can gung up a little bit if you get resin and stuff in there, so I do recommend just spraying them with WD-40 or putting some lubricant on them every now and then, just to make sure they keep screwing in. I actually replaced all mine with bolts that you just tighten with an Allen key, because it just makes it just a lot easier. And yeah, so you want to make sure your VAT's in solid. If it's not, then you can end up with failures on one side, or just failures completely. But it's definitely something worth checking. It's not something you hear about much, so maybe people have had failures for that and not even realised. Again, always make sure the build plate's screwed on properly as well. And again, with the Elegoo ones, I do recommend just re-leveling every now and then, because they're so easy. If you don't tighten them up enough, it's so easy just to knock them out of level just by the odd millimetre and that. That's something I do find with them. I don't want to bash Elegoo, but I use their printers more than anyone else's, so I know the issues that they have, and with other makes I don't. So yeah, it's not bashing Elegoo, it's just using my experience. But I do prefer the VATs where they have the little bits that go over the top on the edges that you screw down, rather than the whole bolt that goes through. I find that just so much easier, and if you forget to tighten them, your VAT only goes up a little bit, whereas if you don't tighten the full bolts, or even put them in at all, your VAT can lift up with the build plate and it could drop and make all kinds of issues. I've seen people post about that before, and yeah, touch wood, not happened to me yet. Hopefully it never will. So I probably should have spoken about this earlier. I've gone all over the place on my list lately. But we're going to talk about supports a bit more. So I was talking about pre-support stuff earlier. I'm just going to talk about supports in general. So it's worth learning how to support miniatures and bits properly. I always recommend the lowest points where you should really concentrate more on your supports. Don't rely on the auto supports for Lychee or Bitzbox. I mean, they're pretty good. But I always like to add just a few more just to be on the safe side. I always like to add like extra supports, just to be sure. So on your lower points, definitely add one or two extra just light supports, because if your low points are successful, then a lot of the parts that come off them will be successful as well. But if you get failure there, the whole miniature could fail, or the whole piece could fail. So they are very important. Any islands, any floating bits, definitely support. And what's good about the slicer softwares is they always mark out where areas need the most supports, so it's just worth adding a few extras there just to be on the safe side. Also, bear in mind the weight of the piece that you're printing. So if you're printing a big heavy bust what's not hollow, then light supports probably aren't going to cut it after a while, so make sure your supports can hold the weight of a miniature. See, I use light supports most of the time because we print just little bits and that. And light supports, just even for normal like Space Marine size miniatures and that, light supports should do the job. Medium at the most. Heavies are really just for your big solid busts and stuff. If you're printing stuff hollow, then you can probably still get away with lights, but I'll probably do mediums on the safe side. Sometimes I'll just auto support in medium and then add some lights, just for a bit of security. Very rarely have I ever used heavy supports. Also, if you are hollowing out miniatures, then obviously make sure you have a lot of drainage holes for them and you cure the inside, otherwise you could end up with a horrible resin explosion later down the line where the miniature will just crack and all the resin trapped inside will just come out. And yeah, that's a failure that you won't know for about 6 months. So lastly, another reason that your resin print might fail is you might have some dried resin in your vat. Normally you'd notice if this would happen because when the build plate comes down and it gets to the bottom, that won't be able to go all the way to the bottom and that'll normally make a grinding noise when it's trying to push its way down. This is obviously quite rare. You should know if you've got dried resin in your vat because that would normally be from a previous failure. So obviously if you have a failure, make sure you clean your vat out properly afterwards. I always recommend doing a tank clean, and that just makes it a lot easier and a lot quicker, and then you don't really have to worry about any little bits of resin being stuck in there. But yeah, that can cause an issue, but normally with that one you would know because you would hear the build plate sort of try and push down onto that piece of resin. But not always. If it's very thin, you might not know. And yeah, I think that's about it from my list. There's probably more. Again, these are all I can really think of for now. There's always some issues propping up, isn't there? Sometimes it could just be a case that it just fails on that instance and you could retry, you know, clean your vat out, put it back in, clear your print bed, just click print again, change nothing else, and it works. That's just how it is sometimes. I've printed enough to understand that sometimes the odd bits just fail, just for no reason at all. It just happens. It could just take one little millimeter just to not print on a support for something to fail, you know. So just persevere with it for sure. If you're new to this and you try and print something and it fails, don't give up on that. Try some of the things I suggested in this video, or just simply try again. But there's plenty of good support communities out there, plenty of groups to join on Facebook. People will always give you suggestions what to do, and yeah, that should hopefully help, and hopefully this video helps as well. I've rambled on a lot. I hope it all makes sense. For people who have been doing this long enough, I'm sure they know exactly what I'm talking about, but I hope it's noob friendly enough. It's hard to sort of explain these things, but yeah, hopefully this can help. And yeah, there's going to be more issues, I'm sure, that can cause failures that I haven't touched upon, or other solutions I haven't touched upon. Definitely jump in the comments and let me know if there's anything I've missed or anything you've experienced that maybe I haven't. I would be very interested to hear about it. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there. I've rambled on long enough. So thank you so much for watching, and please feel free to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel if you haven't done so already. We do the odd 3D printing here and there in amongst the Warhammer stuff, so if that's your thing, we definitely have you covered. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. Again, thank you to our sponsors, Bitzbox. I'll put a link to them down below, and I will see you all again in the next video.